Peter Jesperson. I was born in 1934 of immigrant Danish parents in New York City. America was the promised land, and my mother had already planned to come over a year ahead because she had sent my father over to find a job, get a little bit established, and then when she came over they would get married, which was the plan, and that's what happened. So she came over in 1924, a year after my father, and they got married. And my father had no job. He couldn't speak any English, but he did have a brother who had already preceded him and was working well and spoke good English already. And he took my father around to places to find work, and eventually he landed him a job as a lithographic artist in a company in New York City. My father's trade was a very good trade, and it took care of him until the day he died, many years later, in 1978. My parents in New York City immediately began to hang out with some other Danes they located, and almost every weekend they would have parties and get together and sing, and they'd have a little bit of drinking, and they'd have a wonderful time, and then they'd go off to work again. They all had jobs, all were in good shape. One was a printing pressman, one was an electrician, one was, two of them worked in factories. I'm not sure exactly what they did, but they all had good jobs. Most of them were unmarried when they arrived, and they met and married women over here. One married a Scottish woman, 2 or 3 of them married American women. My mother married her Danish sweetheart. And they all had another common thing. They had very small families, and I think it was part of their idea of quality of life to have a very small quality and a high quality standard of living, which their income at that time could only afford them. And usually they only had 1 or 2 children, but their children were usually excellent students, college students, and did well themselves in life. As to what they did, probably the funniest one was a fellow named Torvald Benson, who was the electrician. He ended up moving out of New York City to Haddonfield, New Jersey, roughly the same time we moved down to Bridgeton, New Jersey. And then I can recall about 10 years after that, him driving into our driveway with a car that would only go in forward, wouldn't go in reverse. And he took off. He said he was going to make his fortune in California. He had 1 son and 1 daughter, and he became highly successful as an electrician and had a business of his own in Palm Springs. And he counted among his famous clientele, who would have no other electrician, by the way, a fellow named Elvis Presley. That was what he told me. Einar Nilsson, he was the one that worked the printing press, and he stayed in New York his whole life. And he worked as a pressman the whole time and had an excellent job as a printing pressman. And the union that they had, it was a wonderful income for a living, and he was very proud of the work that he did as a pressman. He had 1 child. He was married to a Danish woman, by the way. And they had 1 child, Greta Nielsen. And I recall she grew up well, married an IBM executive, and became my grandmother, or godmother. She became my godmother. And she just died a few years ago, and he just died a few months ago. Most of the others, I'm not sure exactly what they do All I know is they did very, very well, successful in one job. Usually they either had no child, one child, or two children. One of them was I do remember one, a guy named Fred Russing, was a Danish pastry maker. And he did that all his life. And he lived in the New York area. But some of them went on to Idaho, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and a lot of them you'll find Danish names all over California. Those were the big states, as I recall, for Danes. So they did succeed, their children succeeded, and their grandchildren are doing real fine. And they all stressed education. One of the things, another thread they had in common, incidentally, was literacy. And I can't stress this too much. All of them learned within 2 years to speak English well enough to get by on English alone. And it was very important to them, and they were very proud to speak English and not to mumble with each other in Danish. And at home they kept their Danish alive, but out in public they worked on their Danish. And at home, I can recall as a child, my parents would never go to bed without a book in their hand, and they would read themselves to sleep. And I often remember my mother criticizing me for not reading more. And she said, reading is a wonderful thing for you. She said it's a way to improve your depth of the world and your vocabulary. And in fact, my parents were very much into Reader's Digest because they had a test which was given once a month on their knowledge of vocabulary. And it was graded all the way from poor to genius or excellent or something like that. And I know how proud they were each month because they always scored in the highest category in vocabulary, even though they could only pronounce about 2/3 of the words. The rest they got from their reading. It impressed me on the fact that how much reading must do for you, that they could come away with an English vocabulary with that. And to hear my mother pronounce some of those words, my brother and I used to crack up laughing. But she got them right, in the right place. So reading was strongly stressed, literacy was strongly stressed. When my parents arrived in America, the very first Christmas, my uncle sent over a Danish Christmas plate. The Danish Christmas plates were a great tradition in Denmark, established in 1894, and by Bing and Grundahl, which made one type of plate, and Royal Copenhagen, which made china and plates just as Bing and Grundahl did, Danish china. And the plates were started about 1894, and they have continued to this day, and they are the oldest tradition of that kind in the world. My mother and father received the plate from Denmark every year until my parents died, and they would hang them in their family room in Denmark on the wall each year, so that the room looked very Danish. It had Danish embroidery, which my mother did, and a lot of Danish china was sent over. Danish figurines were sent over, and things like that, which decorated our home through the years. To Ursinus College as a pre-medical student. I had a craving desire to become a physician. I had this feeling that many people had in those days who wanted to become physician, and that was to do something with my life where I would maybe leave the world a little bit better place because I was here. I was married in 1959 to a girl I met in the catsup factory where I worked. A very lucky family in that we started out with one girl in 1959, Alisa. Next came Peter, our son, in 1962. And then our daughter Kathleen in 1964. And then we were planning to wait a while and have another family of two, but things didn't work out quite the way we expected, and we ended up with one son in 1970. So Alisa went on to college at Ursinus College and graduated with a teaching degree. Peter went to Ursinus, graduated from Cumberland Regional High School, and then went to Ursinus College also, graduated with a degree in pre-medical and majoring in biology, and went on to medical school, and then later on working for the government as an air marshal. Prior to that, he worked as a physician in a prison system for about 10 years. His daughter Kathleen graduated from Bucknell University after graduating from Cumberland Regional High School, and she also had a degree in teaching and is teaching with my daughter Elise. My son David also graduated from Cumberland Regional High School after going through private grammar schools, as did his brothers and sisters. And he went to Davidson College in North Carolina, graduated from there, and then went to podiatry school and received a degree in podiatric medicine, and he now works as a podiatric physician in Millville, New Jersey. Going back to where we were talking about education, how important it was to the Danes' children to be well educated, I can remember a little story my parents often would tell, and it was about some Danes who were visiting in Sweden, or I guess it was about some Americans, because it wouldn't fit right if it were Danes, and they were visiting in Sweden, and a man was being driven through the streets of town with a parade, standing up, waving at everybody, and the Americans said to the people alongside, "What is it? Is he the local football hero? Or is he the soccer hero? Or tell us what they're cheering for him." And they said, "No." He said, "He graduated first in the university."